So, you want to design a city on the fly, or perhaps you have some time to prep a city. Where do you start? What do you do? How do you know what to include, what you shouldn't include, and how do you make it feel special? Oh, so many questions, and so many answers.
This week's sponsor is none other than DungeonFog. Now, their new community hub allows you to browse all the different creators that exist within the DungeonFog community who have shared maps in the public library. You can see the latest, hottest maps, you can search by theme, you can look at what maps your followers have made, and that's right, you can attract followers within DungeonFog by sharing your maps. You can see the latest maps made by the community and shared with the community. You can see new creators that have joined the DungeonFog community, and of course the most liked maps. Now, the best part is, select a map, get a preview of that map, have a look at it, see if you like it, and if you do, you can clone it and use it in your own games, modify it, adjust it, however you might like. Let's look for a different category. Let's use the themes. Right, so nature. Let's have a look at all of the maps that are contained within nature. Several thousand, by the way, folks. Several thousand. Here you can browse all different kinds of nature maps. You can have a look at them as they pop up. And of course, you can always refine your search using tags. Simple little tags, and that will give you even more options to have a look at. Thanks to DungeonFog for sponsoring today's video. Hello and welcome to this YouTube video. Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Guy, and today we're talking about designing a city. And it's pretty much agnostic. Doesn't matter what setting you're in. These are fundamentals that all cities, most of the time, are structured around. Now, why is it useful to know what these are before we even get into what they are? Well, when you are designing a city, frequently you don't have a lot of time to design your city. Your player characters go left and suddenly they need to find a city. You can make these cities up on the fly if you follow these basic building blocks. And as it happens, as humans, we follow these building blocks, well, religiously, because they are the only way that these cities can actually survive. So that's why it's important to know what these things are, so that you can use them on the fly, or even when you are designing your own cities with plenty of time available. So, where do we start?
Is there really a benefit in understanding the geography of the location? Oh, the hills and the rivers and the mountains and open fields or swamps and bogs? Is that all really necessary?
It is fundamentally important to understand everything that is going on in and around that city. So when we look at the location or the geography, how your city survives is critical. If it's on a river, is that river wide enough to support trade? If it's not, is that river wide enough to support a large population? Large rivers are great. Small rivers are okay for towns or for villages, but cities will swallow up that small river in a heartbeat. Generally speaking, cities and towns and villages all have gone through the same evolutionary process. An area was found along a trade route or along a nice, useful piece of geography in a suitable location, and a small community started, and then it grew and it grew and it grew. So by understanding what the fundamental geography is, there's no point in trying to build a city on the top of a mountain that can only support 12 people. You just won't get a city there. Building on all of those little peaks all around, again, is useful, but where is your water going to come from? That's something that's quite important. Is where is the water coming from? If there's no water, surviving is going to be very difficult. Now, we all know the example of Las Vegas, the city built out in the middle of the arid desert where there is no water. Or if we look at the United Arab Emirates, you go, well, there's no water there either, but there are these giant cities. Aha, that's because of the geography. So the geography could be nice and flat, broad and open. It could be that there are huge amounts of farmlands around where there is lots of underground water. It could be, if you are thinking of Roman designs, that water can be brought in via aqueducts or via canals to this particular city. But there has to be a fundamental reason why that city was chosen to be there. So when you're coming up with a city on the fly, if your characters are simply walking through this large tract of your map that you haven't yet mapped out, cities often formed within about a day or a day and a half. Let me recorrect that. Villages often formed within a day to a day and a half of other villages. It was just safer to travel that way on foot. Those villages, starting to be more prosperous than other villages, became towns, or because of their geographic location to wide tradable rivers, or to large forests, or to mineral-rich mountain ranges. All of that played to allow that one village to start to grow, to support a bigger population. The other villages did not grow. So you could look at dropping a city every day and a half or so. You wouldn't have two cities a day and a half from one another by traditional means of transport. Horses, wagons, carts, that kind of thing. It simply is too close to support both having large populations. However, two cities that are several days apart might start to merge together as they grow into bigger and bigger cities, or eventually into a metropolis, which might span 20 or 30 or 40 kilometers, or perhaps half that in miles. So wherever your city is going to be based, you have to initially identify why it's going to be there. There are some times where this city is built here simply because it's far enough away from any other controlling nation to have a vested interest in it. Frequently we saw, especially during the expansion across the West, where cities were just beyond the border of the controlling colony. The whole of my country, South Africa, was colonized primarily because people were moving and building cities where the British were not, which was originally inland. And then once they'd built those cities, then the British came and took them. But that's a whole different story.
All right, I understand. Okay, so yes, those are important things. But in terms of filling our city, I mean, cities are filled with all sorts of structures and places. I honestly, I don't know where to start. I mean, what do we need?
These are dependent, of course, on your setting. If it's a fantasy setting or if it's a sci-fi setting, some of the names might change, but generally speaking, all of these will remain the same. The very first type of structures that you should think about in terms of your city are survival structures. These are structures that are going to be put into place that allow the people in the area to survive. What are they? Generally, it's some kind of blacksmith, so someone who will repair damaged equipment, someone who will be able to make plows or axes or saws. Do you see why knowing why that village was there in the first place, why that city was first founded? If it's a logging city, it's someone who's going to be repairing log saws, axes, climbing boots, all those kinds of things, chains, etc., etc. You're going to have a blacksmith. If you don't, production is going to slow down and become effectively untenable. So we need a blacksmith. We need some kind of tavern. I know it doesn't sound like this is something that is required fundamentally, but there needs to be, whether it's a tavern or an area, a glade, or a smooth patch down by the river, there needs to be some kind of socializing space. Why? If we don't have a socializing space, you will find that those communities don't grow. You just don't meet anyone. If you're going to work and coming back and going to work and coming back and there's no place for socializing, that community is going to take a long time to grow. Initially, those places are also going to be where the court is held, where important news is being distributed. So we need a common gathering point. And traditionally, those became taverns because, well, someone went, hey, I'm not very good at cutting down trees, but I have a brother in another village who makes ale, and I can sell that ale here to pretty much a captive audience. And a tavern is born. And then finally you need some kind of healer, some kind of medicine, a doctor, an apothecary, whatever you want to call them in your community, in your setting, but you need them in that space. People are going to get sick, and if there is no one there to heal them, they're going to die. It is a tragic, repeated history of entire villages just vanishing. Just being left abandoned because something got into that village, some virus, some plague, some disease, and there was no healer, and everybody died. Remember, we're talking about larger communities here, about cities. We're not talking about little villages, but ultimately, these are the three things that you need. Then, once you are done with survival, you then need to move on to security. We need to be able to survive. Now we need some kind of security. Okay, what does security mean? Well, security means as your community gets bigger and bigger, and generally anthropologists agree that it's over the size of 100, by the way, once your community is over 100 people, you are going to need some kind of law enforcement, some kind of enforcer who's going, well, hey, folks, we're all cutting wheat here, except for you. You are sitting playing games. That's not right. You need to go to the stocks for 3 days, or you need to go and be excommunicated from the village, whatever. So we're going to need some kind of law enforcement, and traditionally that was a sheriff or a magistrate of some kind, or perhaps just a jail. Although jails and prisons are a very modern day idea, it could just be a pillory or a stock or something where people are confined for the day, perhaps near the taverns, so they can be mocked and shouted at and embarrassed to then want to become back and be part of the society. Ultimately, this will expand into a guard's house or into a barracks, into training grounds and those sort of things. But initially, we need some kind of security system, someone who's going to enforce that security. We then need spiritual security as well. Generally speaking, the religious facilities are there to provide security for the town or for the city, insofar as appeasing the gods, interpreting the will of the gods, knowing when to plant, when not to plant, keeping records, all those kinds of wonderful things that religious structures do. It is a form of security. It's a wonderful, wonderful form of security, and it gives us a great opportunity to plant these things within our cities where our player characters can go to and ask for historical information, because usually they've been around for a very long time and they have good records, usually. Finally, for security, we then need some kind of leadership, a town hall. That communal gathering area, which became a tavern, just wasn't formal enough. And as your community is growing over 1,000 people, suddenly you need to have a regulated system of administration. There are taxes to be gathered. There are fines to be processed. There are disputes over land to be processed. And that has to happen somewhere. So it's either a town hall, or it's a keep, or it's a castle, some place where administrative authority is dispensed from. Once we have that layer of security, we then need the final layer of buildings, which is going to transform a town into a city. And that's trade. We need to have trade. The city has to be able to export stuff that it is producing and import stuff that it needs. And so as a result, you are talking about warehouses where we can store these things, or grain silos, or logging sheds, or whatever it is that your city is doing. We need to have warehouses, we need to have traders of some kind, and the stores that come with those traders can be more elaborate than just a good old-fashioned marketplace or a town center or something along those lines, as they start to specialize. Because your town is bigger, they can start to support more specific requirements and specific needs. And then you need some form of communication. Now, it could be postal services, it could be messenger pigeons, it could be signal towers, it could be magic resources sending messages from one side to another. You need some form of communication. No town can operate in isolation. There has to be something there. It could literally be a horse and a young rider who will ride for a day in that direction or in that direction to the next post, and then will give the message and move on. So we need all of that. Now, notice something that I have not even touched upon is food. Your city needs to be able to provide itself with food, which is what we spoke about in the first category, which apparently is above me. I don't know why it's above me, but food needs to come from somewhere. There needs to be that sustaining space, and that requires a market. So we need to have somewhere that food comes from: fields, waterways, terraced rice paddies, whatever. However you are generating food for the city, it needs to be made somewhere. It needs to be sold somewhere to the local people, and so it needs a market. And that, in general, is the broad strokes of what your city will need.
All right, so if all cities have got pretty much the same stuff in them, how then do we make them feel unique or special? I mean, aren't they all just going to end up being the same?
Okay, so yes, making it unique is going to be important. We need to customize the city because otherwise all cities are going to start to become the same. And in truth, if you have gone to a lot of major cities, certain areas will probably be indistinguishable from one city to the next, especially the trade and industry spaces, factories and things all pretty much turn out to be the same towards the end anyway. But we can look to several resources that allow us to make these cities unique. The very first one is our defenses. What are the defenses of this city? Are they especially huge? Are they gigantic walls? Are they spike-lined? Are they head-lined in terms of the heads on spikes? Are they diminutive? Maybe there aren't any at all. Are they shimmering fields of electricity that can be raised and lowered? Is it spiritual defense, where there are lines of people that form around the edge of the city chanting and the city is protected from all attacks? What makes the city's defenses work? Square towers, hexagonal towers, circular towers. Perhaps the walls are made out of stone for the first 5 feet and then it's wood the rest of the way. These are little details that you can add in that will make your people kind of realize this is slightly different. Furthermore, are the defenses passive or are they aggressive? Passive defenses would be a wall with an archer on top. Aggressive defenses would be a wall with several ballista on top that are ready to fire, or multiple plasma turrets, or etc., etc. So again, this is going to set the tone going, why does the city need so much? Or why do they not need so much? Then we need to look at scale. Is it a mega city? Are there thousands upon thousands of buildings and millions upon millions of inhabitants? Or is it just a large gathering of people of, say, 10,000 or more? The buildings need to reflect this. So if you look at, for example, Star Wars, their buildings are titanic in structure. It doesn't really matter the number of people living there. They seem to be able to build these gigantic domed structures, these huge towers that stretch hundreds and hundreds of stories up into the air. And you go, wow, that's huge. Well, that's a particular effect that the creator was going for. George Lucas wanted his worlds to seem huge and filled with these ancient things that are mega towering kind of spaces. It's definitely a very different feel from more contained, smaller little towns. Perhaps if you think of Hobbiton from The Lord of the Rings, where, yes, are they towns? Well, they kind of just look like hills with doors and windows. Arguably underneath, there could be a frantic network of structures. But it's small structures. It's not towering, gigantic buildings filled with thousands or millions of people. So scale is definitely going to be another thing that you can use to make your cities feel different from one another. And then the very last thing, when you look at cities, are the inhabitants. And the inhabitants, generally speaking, will either be of the predominant species of that city. So it could be that you find very small communities of different species, if you have a multi-species world, that are living or coexisting. And generally speaking, if you look at what we do here on Earth, you'll get different districts. Well, that's the Chinatown, that's Gaytown, that's the Dutch town, or Old Germany, or New France, or slightly older Finland. I really don't know, folks. So many towns have got so many different districts and areas that sort of seem to be forming. So do you have discrete areas for different species? Is it intermixed, where just no one cares, whatever you are is wherever you are? Is it, this is the dwarf quarter, this is the elf quarter, this is the treant quarter, where no axes are allowed? By creating these more interesting spaces, or by just thinking about them, you can drop them into your game as you go. I think that is all that you need in order to be able to create a city, whether you are thinking about it beforehand or running it on the fly. If you agree with me, hit that like button or the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. And I would love to know, what are your cities? What cities have you made that you find particularly exciting or different or interesting in your own campaign worlds? My personal favorite, I created the city of Quethlin, which is an elvish city which was known for its I think it has 6 towers. And each of those towers, very, very, very George Lucas in their structure, are 20 stories high. They are almost a mile wide each. So you have these 6 large towers that are joined by dozens of bridges, but they form a rosette, a circle. And in the middle is this beautiful garden. On the outside are cattle pens, cattle pens, sheep pens, there's grain silos all around these 6 magnificent white towers. And of course, the higher in the tower you live, the more prestige you have. And so on and so forth. But Quethlin, my favorite city of all time, in most of the campaigns that I've run where Quethlin has been there, Quethlin inevitably ends up being destroyed. So far it's been destroyed by artificially induced tsunami, it's been burnt to the ground, and I think once it was actually vaporized and the entire plane was destroyed right at that specific point. Those are my cities. What are yours? Comments down below. Until next time, a massive thank you to all of our wonderful patrons who keep the lights on and who show their love for the channel. Big thank you to you. And of course to you for watching all the way through until the end. Until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.